So with that, I call this debate to order. All right. And I'm going to tell you the resolution, which is school choice is the best hope for improving our entire education system. And by the way, don't quarrel with the finer points of the resolution. This is a statement to get us going. So our first speaker, who already volunteered, is Roger. So Roger, you can unmute and you have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. I appreciate it and appreciate the great work this group does. My experience with school choice has been very positive. It has a long history because it began quite some time ago. In 1975, our son entered kindergarten in our local public neighborhood school and took off just beautifully. He was enjoying it, loving every aspect of it. He had continued into first grade, and we noticed as much as his social skills were developing, he was beginning to fall behind grade level in reading basic skills, reading and math. Now, my wife is a credentialed teacher at the secondary level, as well as in nursery school and all the way up through junior college. So she was particularly attuned to what a student should be learning at virtually any stage of his development or her development. We talked to the teacher and said, we're a little concerned. And she said, no, not to worry. Your son is doing just fine. He'll learn math and he'll learn to read when he's ready. That concerned us. That laissez-faire attitude was a little bit not to our liking. About the same time, we heard in the news about a new school opening up in the neighborhood also, a back to basics school with an emphasis on the 3 R's. That sounded really good to us. We investigated it a little further, found out that it was going to be, enrollment was going to be on a first come, first served basis. And so we marked the calendar for the date of signups. The night before, we were in the kitchen cooking dinner and had the TV on. And my wife said, honey, there's a TV crew at the school. There are people lining up. Get yourself down there. I'll bring excuse me. I'll bring dinner and a sleeping bag. And so the result was I spent the night on the school campus. A rather enjoyable night because we thought we were doing the right thing. Behind me, two adults behind me, because there was quite a line, turned out to be the district superintendent of schools. I am very impressed. He did not pull rank. He simply wanted to get his young daughter into this new school, which was going to be emphasizing the basics. So the result is that our son went from a situation in which he was below grade level to, after his second grade year, had reached grade level, and by the end of third grade, along with some tutoring we gave him, he had exceeded the grade level performance. And it went on and it got better and better. It was just a really great experience. Well, then fast forward a few years to the time he was to transition to high school. My wife, because she was able to substitute in various high schools around the area, scanned the different faculties and student bodies, checking out where the good schools were. There's nothing like going into the teacher's lounge and talking with other faculty members to find out whether or not what the support was of the district, of the school, the principal, or and what the student body was like. She was able to assess that the school our son would have been assigned to was not the top school by any means. The high school. In fact, another one, just a short distance away, was far superior. So we knew that intra-district transfers within the same school district were frowned on. In fact, rarely granted. But we had contacts with the other administrators, and we asked, when do you grant an exception? When do you allow something like that to happen? And he told
That's our time.
Okay, the bottom line was we transferred him. He absolutely excelled. He went into student leadership absolute outstanding grades. And
Thank
senior
you.
vice president.
Thank you very much. All right, hands for our first speaker. You can use this to indicate good job, whether you agree or not, or you can use that to say you agree. So we'll take a question or two. If somebody has a question for this speaker, just raise your Zoom hand like John did. Good example there. I'm going to call on John for a question. You have just ask a question, not a speech, and you can direct your question to me, Madam Chair.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I wonder if critical race theory, plays a role in advocating for school choice.
Thank you, and you have up to 1 minute to answer, Roger.
I don't believe so. In our case, we live in a suburb of San Francisco, about 25 miles east there. We have integrated schools, Asian, African American, you name it, Latino. No. I don't think so. I don't think so. Not in our experience anyway.
Thank you. And I can take just one more question for this speaker. So Diane Johnson, you can unmute and ask your question to me.
There we go. Madam Chair, I am curious, because I know how things work in Minnesota, was your school choice option that the speaker
was his school choice option? His option,
in,
yeah.
The public school system, or was the alternate schools you went to in the private school system?
All schools.
1 minute.
All schools were public.
All schools were public. Yes, a good question. Because in fact, all the schools were public.
And we learned how to use the system in that sense to get what we wanted.
So I don't know if Diane, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you. And I found my gavel. So with that, the speaker is thanked. All right. So why don't we take more questions? Because that would make that speaker just keep speaking and speaking, and we want to get a lot of voices in. So we're going to continue now. Thank you so much, Roger, for kicking us off. Our first speaker against the resolution is Kay Halpern. Kay, could you unmute? And you have 4 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So if we elevate school choice as the best option for education, we do away with the concept of public education and the public good. I think what this country needs is more balance. Many on the quote red side tend to paint any government effort as veering towards totalitarianism. I spent part of my childhood in Eastern Europe, and I also studied in the Soviet Union. I know what totalitarianism is. There's no First Amendment. You're taught to regurgitate dogma. If you raise honest, probing questions, you are expelled from class. The US public education, properly funded in a pluralistic society, is a far cry from that. In this country, I enjoyed public school education that encouraged me and my classmates to ask tough questions, and it also taught us how to think critically, and compared to today, it was relatively free of ideological pressure from the right or the left. In short, we were taught civics. We were taught how to be engaged citizens in a small d democratic society. And this is what our hallowed American value of liberty is all about. Education, like healthcare, which is a topic for another day, should be a public good. Every child should be able to benefit from a publicly financed education. I currently live in a diverse multi-ethnic neighborhood in Montgomery County, Maryland, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C., and it has well-funded public schools. My kids went to these schools from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. Because of that, many of their close friends are bilingual from immigrant families in East Africa, Latin America, and South Asia. My kids were exposed to a broader slice of the world, to peers from different economic and cultural backgrounds, and they are the richer for it, curious about society and the people in it, and not likely to dismiss someone who is, quote, not like them. School choice should, of course, remain an option, but not touted as the better option. In my opinion, that would atomize society even more than it already is, further dividing our nation and siloing families and communities in their own cloistered bubbles, and discriminate against many families who are not able to afford non-public options. And if I still have some time, I very much appreciate Roger's talk. And it seems that he was able to get what he needed for his child through the public school system. And it just so happens that my younger son had, I guess it's called an IEP, an individual educational plan, because he needed some extra help. And that was all done through the public school system. And my older son, on the other hand, was tested as advanced, and he was able in high school to take advantage of AP classes and an international baccalaureate program that they had at the public high school.
Thank you very much. Hands for our speaker. Appreciate you. And I'll take 2 questions, just in the order I saw your hands. So Rob Davies, you can unmute and ask your question to me, Madam Chair.
Okay, Madam Chair, thank you. I am, and thank you to the speaker for your thoughts. I feel like that was a very comprehensive look at talking about your experience with the system. I'm curious.
Yes.
Her experience with the system. Thank you. I'm curious what the speaker thinks of the status quo of the education system. Like, how right are we getting it at the current time with the degree to which the public schools are a good choice, and whether private schools, charter schools, magnet schools, how does the speaker feel about the status quo?
Okay, 1 minute to answer.
Well, it's true that I think the status quo can vary greatly depending on where you are. And, where I grew up, and at the time, there were very good public schools. And in where I live now, my kids were able to take advantage of very good public schools. I think the key is when there are entities that try to trash the public good and the public sector and defund it, pull money away from the public school system, then it will suffer. And I think when kids have the opportunity to, where everybody can get a good education together with all different kinds of people, I think that benefits society as a whole.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'll take one more question. I see Barry Tamsin. Yeah, go ahead and ask your question to me, Madam Chair.
Okay, Madam Chair, my question is, I also am kind of in the middle when it comes to school choice, and a lot of what she said to me resonated. My question is, how do we grapple with situations in which communities are not socioeconomically and racially diverse? And I would add on that layer, particularly vulnerable communities with failing schools, where the current public option isn't a great one. So I guess I wonder, should it be choice be something that's done more on like a district level versus state level basis? And just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
1
no,
minute.
thank you. I think that's a great question. And I would say there's sort of a short-term answer and a long-term answer. And as I indicated, I don't think school choice should be eliminated. And the short-term answer, and especially one is concerned about one's kids, is if there are no good public school options, then certainly, look to a private charter school or some kind of better education for your kids. So that's the short term. But then in the long term, for the betterment of all and the public good, I would try to lobby, the local school board and the state legislature or the county government, wherever the money is coming from for the schools, to improve the public education in your area.
Thank you. Thank you. With that, the speaker is thanked. All right. Good job, everybody. I really like the way that you all are asking questions. And once we've finished a round, then the staff will automatically lower all the hands that are raised. So that's nothing personal, but we're just moving on to our next speaker. I'm so impressed because so many of you have lined up to speak. It's like immediately when I asked that, the document I'm looking at here, boom, 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 boom. I've got all kinds of people lined up. So we're going to get to everybody as soon as we can. So Lisa Rowe, you're going to be next, speaking in the affirmative. Lisa, you can unmute and you have 4 minutes.
Great, thanks. I wanted to start with a little background. I was educated in the public schools. I did not finish high school. I was expelled in my senior year for excessive absences. So I got my GED and joined the Marine Corps. I subsequently attended college up through a PhD, and then I went back to school and got a teaching license in special education. I have 2 children with special needs who started in public school, and after first grade, we started homeschooling, where they stayed and graduated from homeschool. I also have a sister who's a principal and a teacher in a private school. So from now on, I'm going to refer to public schools as the government school system. The government school system is incredibly complex with many stakeholders. The sheer number of stakeholders make the government school system inflexible and resistant to change. The government school system has students and parents who I argue are the principal stakeholders, also the teachers and administrators, the local school boards, the state executives, the state legislatures who appropriate money, the National Governors Association, the US executive, the president, the Congress to appropriate money, teachers unions, organizations that write the standards for the core subjects like math and science and reading, curriculum development companies, textbook companies, equipment suppliers, standardized testing companies, and on and on and on, all the way through us as voters. It's unbelievably complex. So I affirm the resolution that school choice is the best option for improving our entire education system, because the government school system has become ponderous and inflexible. Too many stakeholders compete to steer the system, and the most important stakeholders, the students and parents, have the least input over policy matters. COVID provided stark evidence of the government school system's abject failures to adapt, and the fact that secondary stakeholders held an outsized influence over reopening. This becomes clearer when comparing in-person learning between government schools and charter or private schools over the same time. When a friend asked me how I would fix the system, I suggested that it can't be fixed. It should be figuratively burned down and completely reimagined. But we know that starting over is not an option. Schools are in continual operation, and we can't shut them down to retool them. Also, many stakeholders will resist any change. This makes substantive improvements difficult to implement. Therefore, the government school system must be forced to change by external pressure, competition from charter and private schools that are accessible to all families by school choice. School choice directly benefits the principal stakeholders, students and parents. They gain options besides the government school system, and they can search for a better fit for the student, kind of like Roger spoke to earlier. Substantial evidence supports improved outcomes for students who have access to school choice. A secondary benefit would be school choice serving as an outside pressure that incentivizes the government school system to become more agile and responsive to student needs. A significant volume of research has provided evidence of academic improvements in the government school systems after school choice programs are implemented. In conclusion, school choice has been researched and proven effective to improve outcomes in local government schools. More importantly, school choice is linked to improve student outcomes. Students, as the most important stakeholders, deserve every opportunity for success. Thanks.
Thank you. Hands for our speaker. Also, cheers to you for keeping it under 4 minutes. So good job. So I'll take 1 or 2 questions. I see some Zoom hands raised. So I'm going to call on Jill. Jill, you can unmute and ask your question to me.
Okay. Yes, Madam Chair. Fundamentally, I understand the speaker's concerns. As a public school teacher, I saw a lot of that, the stakeholder image. However, my question is, if school choice does become a large part of our educational system, will not these other stakeholders also become involved, i.e. testing systems, government standard systems, the things which are imposing sometimes rather burdensome structure on what she refers to as the government schools? How will that not happen if school choice becomes a very dominant part of our education system?
Thank you. 1 minute to answer.
Okay, that's a really great observation and question. I think that smaller schools or charter schools have less pressure for things like textbook companies and testing companies. They can choose the method that they want to use. However, if all the schools were governed by the kind of legislation that we see now, you're right, maybe nothing would change. So, but I'd like to believe that it could change.
Thank you. I'll take 1 more question from Kathy Kopp. Kathy, you can unmute and ask your question to me.
Okay, Madam Chair, I have a brief question and a huge compliment to the speaker for the thoroughness of her speech. But would you please ask if she thinks that the teachers' unions are at the core of the public schools that are dysfunctional? Thank you.
Okay, 1 minute.
I don't think it's the teachers' unions. I think it's the entire structure of the institution. It can go back to every president who tries a policy like No Child Left Behind that sounds great and had a great intention, but it ended up creating a teach to the test structure. So I think the whole system has problems throughout that need to be solved. Teachers' unions are just one part of it.
All right. And with that, speaker is thanked. All right, hands for our speaker and our questioners. Good job. So we are moving to a speech in the negative, and Barbara has signed up to speak. So Barbara V is what I've got. So Barbara, you can unmute and you have 4 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate all the things I've heard. The thoroughness of your ideas are truly wonderful. These days, there is negativity surrounding public education. Teachers are challenged by parents and organizations on highly charged political issues, especially curriculum. Sometimes they're scared for their safety or even the safety of their own students. Privatizing education in this country, which is sometimes called choice, is very often an idea of monetizing it. With few guidelines and regulations, charter and private schools erupt on the landscape, intent on making education pay. In Finland, which has one of the best, if not the best education system in the world, where almost 100% of students graduate from high school, as opposed to our 60%, practically all schools are public. If you want to start a private or charter school in Finland, it is publicly financed, has to follow strict regulations, cannot charge tuition. So there goes the profit motive. We need to make education, public education, a national priority as it was in the 1940s through the 1960s. Even giant philanthropic groups admit that their reforms from decades ago did not work, and they ask educators for ideas. Here's a big idea. Empower teachers to make school decisions, not politicians or business people. School reforms should be made with the public sector so that all students can benefit from a quality program. No, we are not Finland. We are a big, diverse country. However, we have known for years what makes a quality education program, and it's no great secret. Motivated, highly trained teachers and the incentives to keep them on the job, small classrooms so that each child can be reached, up-to-date resources, and a variety of teaching methodologies to match the learning styles of different students. For the last 3 decades, while charter and private schools have proliferated and sucked public money with few restrictions, teachers have often been told that they can't teach anything except what's on the test. It just means pre-test, post-test, on and on. Teachers spend more time testing and less time instructing. It's maddening, it's surreal, and it's shameful. Headlines read, public schools have failed, but the schools haven't failed. Our civic commitment to support and strengthen our schools has failed. If we starve a system, eliminate all the elements of an effective program, what do we think is going to happen? Schools don't attract motivated, inspired teachers. Curriculum is boring and focused on testing. Packed classrooms don't allow teachers a chance to individualize. And in many schools, art, science, drama, PE are gone. Public schools are the equalizing force in a democracy. They create a well-educated, well-informed populace who can make critical decisions about the issues that will greatly affect their lives. If we really want to improve education for all, then we start supporting public education again. Thanks. Did I make it?
Yes, you made it. I thank you. Hands for our speaker. All right, I'll take 1 or 2 questions in the order I saw them. Franklin Ruff, you can unmute and ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question to the speaker is, when we look at school choice, it is parents that are making that choice. And one of those choices is public school, one among many. What is the reason that parents who obviously have the best intentions for their child are not choosing public schools? And what can public schools do to make sure that they are the choice?
Thank you. 1 minute.
I think that I think it's a really good idea to have that kind of competition kind of thing, because I agree with previous speakers that it makes things, where you're looking at, trying to improve what you're doing. But I think that public schools, as one of the speakers said, where they were able to choose a school, but there was an issue with a intra-district, a permit, that was kind of an issue. And I think those kind of things need to be worked out so that parents can have choice to do that sort of thing, to go to a good school.
Thank you. I'll take one more question from Robert Karp. You can unmute and ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering, the speaker seems to have a major concern with monetization of education. And in my experience, there's no big money being made by private schools and charter schools. Every educational organization is struggling to do their work. So I'm just curious where she comes to the impression that school choice would lead to some kind of major profit making from education. Thank you.
Okay,
well,
1 minute.
I would disagree, because charter schools, schools of choice, that kind of thing, are allowed to have public money. And you realize that we even now know that, according to the Supreme Court decision, that religious schools are also entitled to this. You need to know that what public schools do is those special needs that children have, like for speech therapy, a public school, at least in my state, provides that. So that student is bused to my school, and the expert helps that student there. The private school doesn't need to pay for that. The public school takes that burden. And so I think you need to look into that more, because the money does go to those schools. And I'm saying that if it's not done responsibly, that's not a good idea. In Finland, as I explained, it's all publicly financed. They have private schools, they have charter schools, but you have to follow regulations. You can't just make something up like you very often can in this country.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Thank you. And with that, the speaker is thanked. I see all those hands. We'll continue our conversation. Thank you so much, Barbara. All right, our next speaker in the affirmative is Richard. Is it Procida? Procida? Richard, you can unmute, and you have 4 minutes.
Okay, hi, thank you. I didn't know I was going to speak, but basically, I'm a lawyer. I wrote a book on the Constitution. And I haven't heard, it surprised me, I haven't heard anything about religious schools and the separation of church and state. And so I thought that might be an issue that you have. I don't have a problem with people choosing their schools. Let them do it with what's going on in the schools right now, with materials that people are disagreeing with being taught to our children. I think we really need that option, and there really is no wall of separation between the church and state, because the church has a right to petition the government too, and has its own voice. And the Constitution only prohibits the state. It doesn't prohibit the religious institutions in any way, and the only thing that does is the tax code. So I just think it's important not to let that get in the way of this, if that does get in the way, because I think that people having the choice to send their children to their own schools that they want them to go to, you know, using their own money, but they shouldn't have to be forced to go to a public school. If you can pay somebody to do the job, the government contracts with other groups all the time. Let people choose, you know, the school that they want their child to go to. I think that's that would be more free. It may not save our schools, but I think it's will help a lot of people. That's it.
Thank you. All right, I will hear a question or two. I'll call on Mary Ellen. Mary Ellen, you can unmute and ask your question to me.
Yes, Madam Chair. I wondered if the speaker could comment or has any perspective about, it relates to separation of church and state, but I've read some things about school choice as a First Amendment right, insofar as if you have a religious belief that isn't supported, or a cultural belief that isn't supported in your public school, could he comment on that as a First Amendment issue?
Thank you. 1 minute for a response.
Well, I think on one hand, it's a good theory. I'm not sure if there's a right to put yourself into that school, or not be, at least not denied that. I think there's two issues with that. One is, yes, you may have a different cultural belief or a different religious belief, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you should be exempt from laws of general applicability. Or and then sometimes there are laws that are designed specifically to prevent certain types of discrimination, which in that case, to grant an exception to discriminate would defeat the very purpose of the law. So those are the two responses I'd give to that.
Thank you very much. And I'll take one more question from Bernie, friend. Bernie, you can unmute and ask your question to me.
Yes, Madam Chair, I would hope that whether the school is private or public, that there could be like an FDA, or when restaurants are inspected and they get a number, that someone from government comes in and makes sure that the teachers aren't monotone, because the way that they teach, it will not engage people. I was one of those people.
And what's your question?
My question is, we have to get rid of teachers that are so-so. We can't have tenure. That's my question.
Okay, 1 minute to
It may not
respond.
be, yeah.
I don't know about that. I guess tenure can be good if you're getting tenure, but bad if you want to fire somebody. But I think commitment to teaching is important. Definitely getting rid of bad teachers is an important thing. I watched that in teachers who abuse their kids and so forth. But I think one thing is that I think our teachers are doing a great job. I think they're teaching American history, and they've been teaching American history and other subjects for a long time. And all this attack on the schools and on the school districts and on public schools is whether it's coming from the left or the right, is out of line as far as I'm concerned. They've been doing a great job, and they're not our students are not the cause of what's going on in the world right now.
Thank you very much. With that, the speaker is thanked. All right. You're all doing great. And thank you all for being conscious of your time. I will let you know when your time is up. And so I'll keep us moving along. So a speaker against the motion, against the resolution will be Alex Weisenfels. Alex, you can unmute and you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll activate my timer here. On the one hand, I can see why parents would expect to be able to choose the best among multiple options for where their kids go to school, especially if it means they can avoid bad schools. On the other hand, I don't think school choice solves the deeper problem. There should not be any bad schools. If we solve that problem, then school choice becomes a less important issue either way. The idea that school choice incentivizes public schools to compete with private schools doesn't work because the regulated systems used by public schools don't allow them to innovate in their methods or curriculum the way private schools do, to say nothing of punishing public schools by cutting their budgets. That's counterproductive. And the more we fight over this false dichotomy, the less thought we put towards what makes a school good in the first place. And to know what we really want out of a school, we need to ask what makes a good education. And I submit that an education system must empower students to realize their potential and develop their strengths. And that way they can build good lives for themselves with what they earn by contributing to their communities and to society in general. Equally important is that the education system must be mindful of what constructive skills society needs in order to deal with the fundamental problems we face as a civilization, resource limits, natural disasters, etc., and equip people with those skills to deal with them. And if there's a shortage of a particular type of skill, we may want to encourage people to learn it and reward them for accepting a less comfortable path. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, education must alleviate students' blind spots. It's not necessary that every person be an expert in every subject, but every person should know how to recognize malfeasance or incompetence in important fields, just from knowing the mindsets involved in those fields, and they can do brief research on the field's foundational principles. Because a person with basic literacy in all the core mindsets can follow conversations about any problem and ask insightful questions. So they'll not only be an informed voter, but also will be able to suggest and judge good policies for their communities. And we can accomplish these goals by teaching mindsets. Just realized I hadn't reset my stopwatch, so I was scared there for a second. A mindset is a meta skill, a way of thinking that engages with a particular aspect of the world. Practicing a mindset in one context makes it easier to learn skills in other contexts that use the same mindset. And so schools can teach students the core mindsets through the skills and contexts that are meaningful to the local communities. And then the students can learn to apply those mindsets to other contexts and other skills if they have to. With solid foundation in all the mindsets, students have a place to start handling any problem and can continue learning and developing their skills however they see fit. And so all we need to do is supply schools and students with the resources and methods they will need to teach and learn the core mindsets, effectively apply them to the relevant contexts, and then hold them accountable for the results. After we implement this plan, there should be no bad schools, and the school choice will be neither urgently necessary nor potentially harmful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hands for our speaker. We'll take a couple of questions. I'll start with Rachel from Arizona. Rachel, you can unmute and ask your question to me.
Yes, good evening, and thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate all the speakers and their contributions. Just one little piece of background information. I was an educator for 35 years, retired educator in classroom and as an administrator from Arizona. And we are having a battle here, if you're not aware of that. My question is, which relates to what is happening here, where our taxes are being used in a voucher system, where people can take a voucher to a private school, religious school. And so we are using our tax money for private schools to fund them. They are also can be used for even used for theme parks. They can be used for vacations.
Can you tell us what your question is, since this is a question time?
Yes, my question is, do you believe, Speaker, the past speaker, I know Alex, you did a great job. If there are any other speakers who believe that that would be a good thing based on private versus charter? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Alex, you have 1 minute.
Oh, okay. Well, so I was a speaker in the negative, so I don't think that enabling these vouchers is going to result in the problem getting better, at least not on its own. So I guess I don't see any necessary contradiction between the question and what I was saying.
No, there isn't that, but there are some other speakers and I just didn't get a chance to get that question.
No problem. Yeah, that will certainly become part of our conversation. And also, if you would like to make a speech, you can chat to your whip and we'd love to hear more from you. A question from Stacy. You can unmute and ask your question to me.
Yeah, I had a question about if there's no school choice, but here in Denver, we have, so you have district boundaries. And I've noticed a lot of the boundaries are deliberately around affluent neighborhoods have crazy boundaries to keep the affluent neighborhoods in one school area and less affluent neighborhoods in another one. So if there's no school choice, how would we solve that problem?
This is a good question. So, and I do definitely appreciate the use of school choice to help kids get to better schools. I'm concerned about that it sort of diverts attention away from all the students who can't do that, who get left behind. So I think that a better solution would be to make sure that schools get as much funding as they need. Just not even thinking about how to equalize the funds between districts, but just making sure they get as much money as they need to run a good school. And then we figure out where that's going to come from. Does that answer the question?
Okay, thank you very much. And with that, the speaker is thanked. All right, continuing to move along, we are going to move to 3-minute speeches with one question each. That'll move our conversation a little faster, get more voices in. So just be aware that it'll be 3-minute speeches and maybe one question after each if there are questions. So let's see, we're in the speaker in the affirmative. Robert Karp, would you like to speak? If so, you can unmute and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I am an advocate for school choice. And I believe that, first of all, many of you are probably aware we have a shortage of teachers right now. Teachers don't want to enter into the public system to teach. Why is this? It's because enormous bureaucracy, micromanagement. Why is that? It's because we have all these, as the earlier speaker said, all these stakeholders, all these bureaucrats, school boards deciding curriculum. What's the result of that? Culture war. It means all these different groups that have different value systems want to gain control of the state in order to impose their values onto the public school system. This was what was happening when we still had, you know, a national church. We need to have a separation of school and state the same way we've had a separation of church and state. Right now, we have all these cultural groups fighting to gain control over our children's curriculum. And my belief is we need to free up the whole landscape. Parents are the ones who should have the authority to decide. We actually have, as I see it, a very good system of school choice in Arizona, where we have scholarship associations that people can contribute to. It allows equal access for children. To me, all schools should be quasi-private, quasi-public, meaning any child can gain access to a school of their choice, but anybody essentially could start a school. Let's allow the full competition so innovation can happen. And trust me, the bad schools are not going to take over because parents are going to pull their children out of the bad schools. We need to allow a marketplace of diversity to happen. And our society is becoming so diverse. Just think about it. We can't force this diversity into a funnel of public education. We have to give room for people to start all kinds of schools. Let them do it. Let's have it. Let's get all the innovations and potential out there. And then the best schools will indeed rise to the top. But again, I would just assert to you that what we're dealing with now is something like a state church, where we're all trying to agree on something so fundamental. It's so deep, the value systems associated with education. And my opinion is, let's just take that problem away. Let's let diversity come into the educational sector. Let's create systems so that children have equal access. We can have good certifying associations to make sure these schools teach to a high standard. We don't need the government involved in education anymore. It's fueling the culture wars.
Thank you.
It's not helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hands for our speaker. And we'll take one question. And Leslie, I saw your hand first. Do you have a question for this speaker?
Yes, but it's a question that could be asked just generally. By school choice, do we mean that every child should get funded equally to attend whatever school they want? Is that what we mean by this term, or what exactly do we mean by it? And I guess since I'm addressing this to you, I'm asking the speaker through you what he means by school choice. Does he mean each child should get to apply?
Yeah. All right. Yeah, go ahead, and 1 minute to answer.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so that is my vision of school choice. Absolutely, that every child would receive some voucher. However, I prefer the Arizona option for that than the option for where the money goes through the state. However, every child would have the option to attend a school of their choice. And this way, what we call private schools would actually become quasi-public. It's simply in that it would be equal access to all schools. But I would do away with the state regulatory system and the school boards and let teachers, my friends, let's let teachers run education, run schools.
Thank you. And with that, the speaker is thanked. Our next speech in the negative is from Charlie Wilson. Charlie, would you like to make a 3-minute speech against the resolution? If so, you can unmute and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am a law professor, and 20 years or so ago, my dean assigned me to teach education law courses, education policy courses, and school funding courses. And at that time, I was of the view that I didn't care what kind of schools our kids went to as long as they were good schools. I wanted them to be good schools. But after more than 20 years of study, reading, writing, teaching, it is clear to me that if one is driven by data and by studies and by facts, our future lies only with public schools. because we have tried now for 30 years various kinds of school choice, whether it be the vouchers in Milwaukee or charters starting first in Minnesota and now spreading to 43 different states. And there has not been one single peer-reviewed study that has shown that either voucher schools or charter schools perform better than, on average, the public schools from which those kids came from with identical demographics in the same area. We're getting a little hung up here on our terminology because actually when I read the resolution, I thought what we said by school choice, we meant vouchers or charters. And our very first speaker, Roger, made my case for me by arguing for choice in the public sector. A common mantra of school choice folks who want to privatize our schools is one size does not fit all. And of course, anyone spouting that mantra is hoisting up a straw man. No one in public education believes one size fits all. Public schools consistently strive to give diverse offerings, and teachers are steeped in many, many strategies for approaching students' unique learning styles. As Roger pointed out, every school district offers all kinds of alternatives. My small high school school district of 12,000 students, we have 5 totally different high schools, 4 different middle schools that are entirely different. So within the public system, we've got enormous school choice. We don't have to start privatizing them by using inferior charter schools or voucher schools. Several countries have also tried to go the privatization route, Chile and Norway, but they're not the only ones. And it was a tremendous failure. Of those high-performing schools that have moved from being, countries that have moved from being mediocre to being superior, all of them relied on investing in their public school system and focusing on equity and giving kids what they needed to have to reach their full potential.
Thank you. Thank you. Hands for our speaker. I will take one question. And by the way, if I've already heard you speak, I might go to the next hand I see for a question. I'm trying to get in as many voices as I can. So Joe B, I see your hand raised for a question. Joe, you can unmute and ask your question to me.
Oh, just making sure I'm audible.
Yep, gotcha.
Okay. Yeah. Madam Chair, I was wondering how the speaker intends to get any peer-reviewed studies on private schooling done if a totalitarian government attempts to force all children into a public system and likely ends up going to war with parents over that.
Okay, 1 minute to respond.
Let's be clear. In this country, I don't know of anyone, and I'm certainly not one, who opposes parents sending their children to the private school or religious school of their choice. What I do oppose, however, is diverting money from public schools to religious schools or to private schools or for-profit schools. But I certainly do not want to take away the constitutional right, frankly, of parents to send their kids to whatever school they wish to send it to. What we do need to make sure, though, is that we don't fund those schools when we're not adequately funding our own public schools. So we do not have a totalitarian government. This is not a totalitarian system. We've got to preserve our democracy. And as James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, John Dewey, and Horace Mann all emphasized, the only way we're going to have a democracy and keep it is to have good common public schools. Without common public schools, we're going to become a divided society. We're going to stay on our own silos, and we're not going to be able to speak across those ideological gulfs that divide us, or religious gulfs.
Thank you.
Or wealth
Thank you.
gulfs of class.
With that, the speaker is thanked. All right, moving on. Our next speaker in the affirmative is Joanne Riki. Is that right? Joanne, you can unmute and you have 3 minutes.
Well, thank you for acknowledging me. And
I don't really have a speech to make. I just want to make a clarification about the way people are discussing charter schools, because there are two different groups of charter schools. There are private charter schools and there are public charter schools. And public charter schools do not charge students, and they have more freedom than the local school district to decide what they're going to do with their curriculum. And generally, any student that lives in the district where that charter school is able to choose to go to that charter school. The limiting factor is how many spots are available. And in my mind, there is quite a difference between a public charter school and a private charter school.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks for our speaker. Clarifications, always welcome. It looks like there's a question for this speaker. Rebecca, would you like to unmute and ask your question to me? Rebecca, can you unmute?
Sorry,
Great.
I hit the wrong button. Yes, Madam Chair, I just want to ask the speaker, what does she feel about the charter schools? And I do appreciate that you brought up the difference between public charter schools and private charter schools with the money funding. What I have noticed is if a parent or a student has concerns with their child in these charter schools, they threaten the parents, or if the student were to complain about something that the charter school, this is public funded or charter, public charter school or private charter school, they threaten the parents that if you complain, we'll just send your kid back to public school. This is very common. I've heard this from hundreds of parents. How do you feel that should be addressed in with the charter schools? You have a choice, but then they have a choice in these schools to send the student back to public schools. So parents, are they able to advocate that way?
Okay, yeah, 1 minute to respond.
Well, I don't have a lot of information. I don't have a lot of experience in this regard. There's a fairly new charter school in the city where I live, and they have a contract that parents sign before the children come to the school. And their philosophy is that education is between the school, the parent, and the child. And the school teachers and administrators work with the parents and the children before any such steps would be taken like that.
All right, thank you. And with that, the speaker is thanked. All right, good job. Again, clarifications, always welcome, and definitions. The resolution provides a point of conversation with us, and we try to do a resolution that kind of divides ideology between two different sides so that we can really mix it up and understand each other. So we're looking for a speech in the negative now, and next on my list is Frankie Hires. Frankie, if you would like to unmute and speak, you have 3 minutes.
I think I got it.
There you go.
So as a Jeffersonian Republican, I prefer a government that's frugal and simple. And with regards to this topic, I can't imagine that this just isn't a better mousetrap coming from, I guess at this point, those on my right. Typically, I don't think this is such a different problem than many others that we face. And here's an analogy that came up while listening to folks, was that in the issue of healthcare and veterans, those who have served, right? You have an option, you have choice. You can accept the TRICARE that you're provided, or you can choose private insurance or any other form of healthcare that you want. And I think that most people agree, and most studies reveal that TRICARE is preferred and outperforms by as much as 20 times what private insurance does in any other form. And the problem that I have with this fundamentally is that there's too many efforts to fix something that is so fundamentally broken that we can't see exactly how it is. In other words, that frugal and simple government no longer exists. As people spoke to the many parties that got their hands in this pie, right? This is just a trough, and it feeds mostly an education industry and an agricultural industry. All these schools are required to provide food. That taints how this is all getting done from the get-go. We have no principles, and we don't understand how this government is formed, right? And you don't understand how your education governing bodies are even formed. I'm having a debate with my local council person about what influence they could have over soccer fields and whether or not the local schools could get soccer fields at the hands of my local parish council, which is a county in other states. However, when it comes to educational funding, this is such a convoluted crotchet of ingenuity that's put upon us that if you think adding some new crotchet is going to fix it, no chance. Your school boards are formed arbitrarily. Your state governments are formed arbitrarily. I can't find anyone to explain to me the fundamental principles of Republican form, not about democracy. There's no guarantee of a democracy in the Constitution, but there's a guarantee of Republican form. If anybody feels bold and ambitious, explain to me what that might mean. When it comes to representatives, to anything that you're going to elect to or you're going to submit to, right? Your direct taxes, representatives and direct taxes, several states within a union, according to their respective numbers. We wouldn't have to argue about how our money is getting spent. You're defined by what you do and what you choose not to do, right? So we're all arguing about what you're going to do with my money with regards to schools because we don't trust each other. And we don't trust each other because we don't know each other. And we don't know each other because it's been too long since we bothered to pay attention to how we empower an office of trust. That's it.
Thank you. Hands for our speaker. And we will take a question. And I see Kay has her hand raised. So Kay, you can unmute, ask your question to me.
Yes, Madam Speaker. The speaker mentioned that school boards and other bodies related to administering schools are formed arbitrarily. My understanding is that people vote for candidates on the school boards and for their local government and their state government and so on. So to have the speaker please explain how voting is arbitrary.
Okay, 1 minute to respond.
Thrilled to. So I ran for state senate, and the interesting thing about it is that I didn't know about this thing in Louisiana called the Board of Early and Secondary Education until I ran for Senate, and my daughter was already off to Sarah Lawrence College. Now, I attended school board meetings, but those bodies are formed arbitrarily because there are a dictated number of members to those bodies, just like there's a dictated number of representatives to your house, your state house or your state senates usually. We put the plow in front of a horse, and we don't see it because it's been there for so long. Right now, it applies to your school boards. They don't take the portions of your county and then decide how many people are in each portion, whether it's a municipality or not, do they? But they take the direct taxes arbitrarily. From a municipality to the unincorporated areas, you're taxed arbitrarily. Those taxes are then malfeasance among any number of nonprofit institutions, for-profit institutions, your state legislature, and 2 governing bodies, your local school board and probably a statewide board, all of them skimming off our money.
But do the people vote for them?
Thank you. Thank you.
They acquiesced to it. We've acquiesced.
All right. Thank you very much. And with that, the speaker is thanked. All right. I make it a personal mission to stay on time, and I really appreciate everybody sticking with it. So we're going to take right now just a moment for a stretch break. If you want to stretch or stand up or anything like that, and while you're doing that, just take a little bit of a break for just a moment. I want to tell you that our next debate is going to be just in 2 weeks. It's Thursday, October 6th, and we have never done this before. We're so excited. Your debate staff has put this together. It is an intra-red debate. And at the same time, in a different Zoom, an intra-blue debate. So the Reds get together and find some, distinctive opinions on an issue, and the Blues get to do the same thing because, in each leaning, there is difference of opinion. And so we're going to get to explore that. And I'm even going to tell you what the resolutions are because we've worked really hard on this. The Reds are going to talk about this: whether only taxpayers should vote. Okay. The Blues are going to talk about this: whether government should provide for everyone's most basic needs. So you get to be in your own room with, some like-minded, and there's a breadth of opinion in each room, which is fine. But that's going to be really interesting. So that's a new thing we're trying out. So we'd love for you to be part of that experiment in 2 weeks. And thanks, Jim. He put the sign up right there. You can click on that, and that'll just get that in your browser ready to sign up. One more thing in our break before we get back to our debate, and that is I want to have a brief moment from Paul Norris, who's one of my favorite speakers. Paul, can you speak to us for just a moment about Braver Angels?
Oh, shucks, Cynthia. Now I'm so embarrassed I don't know if I can give my pitch. But I'll try. So I've been a volunteer with Braver Angels for 4 years. And I say that just to say that, I have a breadth of experience with the organization. And I just want to talk a little bit of the experience of being a Braver Angel. I don't know if we're going to change the world. I don't know if we're going to save the country, but I certainly do know the experiences that I've had as part of this organization. And I find that it gives hope. The people who you meet, the friends you make who you might never make otherwise, just maybe joining this organization will save your sanity, or at least make you a lot more sane than the people around you. And another thing that I find very surprising or enjoyable or wonderful is it seems to get better over time. And this is not something that is true of all the organizations one can join. But there is something about the sincerity and the caliber of the people who run the organization. And since I'm not one of them, I think I can say that, that is just incredibly heartening. And, we have a bunch of different programs. Whatever floats your boat, chances are good that we might have something like that. I'll just mention a few of them. One-on-one conversations, these wonderful debates, lots of different kinds of workshops, and particularly the experience of joining your local alliance and getting to meet people who are in your own neighborhood and just working together to make the world feel like a better place. Whether we make it a better place or not, we can make it feel like a better place. So please join. And if you feel like throwing a couple bucks in the kitty, that would be appreciated as well.
Thank you, Paul. Hands for Paul, one of our amazing volunteers. Yeah, and it was in response to a pitch like that we got Emily to be on our staff tonight as a volunteer. Yay, Emily, and all of our volunteers. Okay, we are back at it. I'm going to get my timer ready. We're still on 3-minute speeches with one question each. So let me look at my list here. Thank you, Whips. You're doing such a good job here. Kathy Almond. Kathy, would you like to speak? You have 3 minutes. Can you unmute, Kathy? Are you here?
Hi, yes, thank you.
Great, go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to pose to the group a question that I think lies at the base of all of this is what is the purpose of public schools? Is the purpose of public schools, as maybe I have heard others pose, that in the late 1800s, when public schools were first proposed, to make factory workers, as in widgets, as in we need everyone to conform to a certain ideal and have certain skills that they are able to then into the factory to be good workers. Is that the purpose of public schools? Is the purpose of public schools to provide a baseline so that everyone has the same opportunity to start from the same starting point with at least the basics? Is the purpose of public schools to have each child reach their potential and meet each child where they are so that they meet that potential? And I'd be interested to hear the ideas of other people in the group. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Hands for our speaker. And as everybody is making their speeches coming up, if you could keep that in mind. I will take one question, though, because I see a couple hands raised. So Robin, you can unmute and ask your question to me.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. I'd be interested in what the speaker thinks the purpose of public education is.
All right. You have 1 minute, Kathy, to respond.
Thank you. So that's an interesting question because I think it's different for everyone. For my own children, I think I hoped, and to be perfectly clear, I sent my kids to both private school and public school throughout their 12 years. We were a military family, we moved a lot. So depending on where we were, we did research on the schools before we got to the place. Sometimes public schools were adequate, sometimes they were not, so we sent them to private. So that's an interesting twist on it. But I do believe the purpose of public schools is to have a basic bottom line that everyone has an equal opportunity to start from the same starting point.
All right, and with that, the speaker is thanked. We are moving to 2 minute speeches, with which Kathy actually already did. So props to her, because we really want to get all these voices in. So set your timers for 2 minutes, and I will also keep track of that for you. I will say the most gentle thank you when your time is up, and you can just finish your thought there. So we're going to have a speaker in the negative, Molly Zeff. Molly, you can unmute, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I had to grab my notes, which are on my phone unplugged in, so don't count that against me. I wanted to start by saying I think there's a high level shared goal, and I like to point that out sometimes in these debates, which is to ensure that as many kids as possible have access to as good an education as possible. That's about improving the system. So I want to state that just forthright in the beginning, because I think that we have to remember we all agree on some of the end goals here, how to do that. And I want to just make sure that people remember what the resolution is. And I looked back at it just to make sure I had that high level in mind, which is school choice is the best hope for improving our entire education system. I think one thing that vouchers do is they allow individual families to make better decisions for their individual kids. But I don't think long-term that a lot of individual families moving their kids out of a public school into another school will change that school that they're moving away from. And a lot of the problems, one of the speakers pointed out some of the problems with the public education earlier, a lot of the problems we see in public schools, teachers leaving, the Great Resignation, I have friends who are part of that with teachers. Teachers are leaving en masse, schools being underfunded, teachers being underpaid. There are a number of problems, and many of them, not all of them, and many of them cannot be solved with people leaving the public school system in mass. And I will also point out, some people said that there was data that vouchers worked. There's actually a lot of mixed data, and I encourage people to look this up on whether the vouchers work or not. Some studies show that students actually went down in their math scores or other scores over time after getting vouchers and being moved to private schools. Some studies show, earlier studies, should they improved, some studies were neutral. So there's actually very, very mixed results on whether people's individual scores actually are improved or not. And you can find a number of studies showing that they aren't. I'm not gonna cite individual studies where they are, I only have 2 minutes here. And then I'll also mention what is a better solution? Oh man, that's hard. Integration. If you look up a major piece on This American Life from a number of years ago points out that school integration is the #1 way we know to improve public schools. Unfortunately, this solution, and this is where I'll end, was undermined by the Supreme Court in 2007 with a famous case some of you will be familiar with. Parents in Seattle schools, parents in community schools versus Seattle School District. So look at how that case undermined integration, but there's an obvious solution here. I wish I had 2 more minutes, but basically, if you want to ask me any questions, ask me about integration, because that is the #1 way we know to improve school outcomes.
Okay.
I'm good.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thanks for our speaker. And yes, we'll take one question from Bob. Bob, I see your hand raised. You can unmute and ask your question to me.
Okay, well, I'm not quite sure how to approach this, Madam Chair. I speak kind of as a grandpa, so I can remember when I went to school, and it seems like schools aren't as good now as when I went to school. And I don't quite understand why. And I'm thinking that competition is a good way compared to integration. I don't know what's the difference between integration and competition. I think competition improves things in this country.
And
So
your
I
question
think
is?
School choice improves competition. So I'm just curious on the speaker's reaction to the competition idea associated with school choice.
Okay, 1 minute to respond, Molly.
I'm not sure what you mean by competition. I will say that since 1988, school integration has declined. We know that a lot of the outcomes of, I think if you're talking about, is the questioner allowed to say what he means by competition?
I'm going to say, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, well, basically, sometimes things don't change until people are forced to change. And competition forces changes in this country. So how do we force the schools to get better?
Okay. Across an entire public school district, competing for spots in a limited number of schools means that some wealthier, historically advantaged parents will have access, will end up not getting the school they want. And we know that wealthier parents and parents with two households also are more likely to be able to fight for a better education. And so don't create competition between the public school and the schools where you could use a voucher. Create competition against an entire system like the parents had, like the school system of Seattle did before that historic case in 2007. Again, if people want to look that up, it's parents in community schools versus Seattle. So I'm just going to say that you create competition across an entire public school system, because when people are forced to have their kid at a school that's not as good, believe me, they'll fight for that school to be better.
Okay, with that, the speaker is thanked. Our next 2-minute speech will be Alan Falk. Alan, would you like to speak? You can unmute and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I had to get back to that page. I was doing some web surfing for information. Yeah, a couple of things. Wish I had 3 minutes or 4. Roger's opening comment about good schools with good students falling behind. A short story on that. We had some friends in California who wanted great educations for their children. So they spent like $10,000 or $20,000 a year for what was considered one of the best parochial schools in Silicon Valley in Saratoga. And the kids were happy. They loved it there. Everyone was happy with them. They loved their classmates and teachers and everything. A couple of years later, they decided that for employment reasons, they had to move to Texas. So they moved to Spring, Texas, just north of Houston, and they enrolled their kids in, and the kids were, getting A grades and whatever, top of the class. When they got to Houston, they enrolled in the classes there, middle school, high school, and they had to pass an entry exam. And the entry exam showed that all the kids were about 2 grade levels below the standard in Texas for them. So they had to spend another $umpteen-thousand for remedial teaching to bring them up to speed so they could go into the class which would be age appropriate. This was around the same time that Common Core was very popular. I assumed that Common Core would be a nationwide way of comparing schools. And it turned out it wasn't. If Common Core had done that, they would have been able to compare their school with the school they were going to go to and see how they compared in terms of results and everything else. So that kind of change, even instituting something like that, I think would be a really great thing to have here. Let's see. Do I have time for any more? I didn't set my timer. Common Core.
You got about 10 seconds. Do you want to have a wrapping up statement?
Many people consider monopolies and big business and stuff like that to be really bad things. But if you consider public schools and teachers' unions as monopolies and very powerful, I need you to consider that too, because that's the downside for what a lot of people don't like. Thank you.
Okay. All right. That speaker is thanked. Is there a question for the speaker? If so, I will call on you. All right. And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you so much. Our next speaker will be Miriam Friedman. Miriam, are you with us? You can unmute and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you for the debate. And this is my first time on one of these, so
yay, welcome.
So what I want to emphasize, I'm going to go back to the resolution. School choice is the best hope for improving our entire education system. It saddens me beyond sadness that we've been fighting this distraction for more than 30 years. I mean, the best way to solve a school problem is to end the reading wars, for example, so that children actually learn how to read, but we're still fighting the reading wars, and we are fighting about school choice. After all these years, 30 years, I think we have maybe 7 million kids in a charter school, fewer than that in using vouchers. We have 60 million kids in our schools, less now because of COVID and people have disappeared. So I find this to be such a sad distraction. Who am I? I'm a school attorney. I've represented public schools for 100 years, mostly in special ed. I'm a former school teacher. I'm a parent. I'm a grandparent. And I wanted to come on this to just talk about how have we allowed this issue to take over the quote unquote reform movement in public education. I think it's a disaster. I think it's distracting. And I don't think we're getting better schools as a result. I mean, we can argue about the data, but that's my view.
All right. Thank you. Hands for our speaker. And I'll take one question. I see Dan. Dan, you can unmute and ask your question to me.
Madam Chair, I guess my question is I understand the speaker's point of view, very well articulated, but I think it is probably because we haven't met the goal, the basic goal of public education. That is possibly why we are being distracted. The first speaker, I had a question of him. His wife found where the good schools were. What determines where the good schools were? Wouldn't it have been great to go there and find out that all the schools were equal at the same time?
Is that your question for the speaker?
That is my question. So how do we get to stopping to need to look at that? How do we go from there?
Okay, Miriam, you have a minute to respond.
I don't know practically. I mean, I do want to say one thing. If I'm a parent of a child in an awful school district, if somebody gave me a choice to do something else, I would have done it. There is no doubt about that. There is no doubt about that. But my problem as a public policy We have been arguing about school choice for a generation and a half. And things have not improved. I just don't think it's the answer. I really think ending the reading wars, and there's so many other practical things we could do, would be the answer. So actually kids by 3rd grade can read, and then people wouldn't be pulling their kids out of, but we're fighting these stupid battles. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. But, you know, so there's the public view. What is my idea of a public policy? And there's the private view. I'm a mom and I've got a kid in a horrible situation. Do I just sit there or do I try for something else? Those are 2 different questions, unfortunately, but that's the way the world works.
Yeah. Yeah. And with that, the speaker is thanked. All right. We're moving to a speech in affirmative for 2 minutes, and I'm going to dispense with questions now because I want to move and try to get all these speakers in. So just speeches, 2 minutes. George Renkel, would you like to speak? George, you have 2 minutes.
Okay. It's interesting following the last speaker because I'm not going to talk about this from the standpoint of the schools and talk about it more from the standpoint of the parents. I'm a grandfather. My 3 kids are in their 30s. I was very fortunate in that they all went to public schools and I was able to pick the schools. And the way I was able to pick the schools is I would decide where to live based on the schools. And a lot of people in my socioeconomic group, I know, do that. You know, when they're going to move someplace, they say, let me look at the schools. I'm going to move to the town with the school with the good reputation or the school with the good stats. I'm not going to move to the area where it's not. I think school choice is important because I look at it from a standpoint of fairness. And there are a lot of people that are not in the same situation as me and cannot necessarily pick where they live. And isn't there a way to give them some choice of being able to select the school that they think is best for their kids? So, you know, whether it's public charters, private charters, vouchers, it's just a mechanism to put more control in the hands of the parent for them to do the best with their kids. And I'm less concerned with the aggregate as I am with making sure that parents actually have choice.
All right. Thank you. Hands for our speaker, and the speaker is thanked. Speaking against the resolution, Jill Spross. Jill, you can unmute and you have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Retired public school educator for 20 years in Texas. My comments really have to do with school funding. As someone who lived and worked within the same school district, and since school districts get approximately a little over 50% of their funding from property taxes, I think it's very interesting that I was donating to my own salary. And I think that's something that needs to be seriously addressed. If you're going to have vouchers, government-funded vouchers to allow students to move within schools, why not just put that money into the schools? People don't want to pay taxes. Well, you get what you pay for. Teachers are leaving. When you're making, you know, $42,000 a year, that's difficult to live on for someone who's got a college degree. Texas did try a Robin Hood approach by taking the school monies from all of the districts and then distributing that. And the uproar from the parents was unbelievable because parents do have power within the school districts. And I would also just like to say, there's a very real difference between an education goal, which is something that Common Core was addressing. What should your child be able to do at the end of 3rd grade, at the end of 8th grade? How that methodology is addressed is a district decision. So your district, where you do have input, will often be the one that's making the decision as to how that educational goal is met. So there's a lot, parents have a lot of power. And I had many students who came within my class who had come from private schools, vouchers, so they came from everywhere. And
Thank you.
Funding is an issue.
Thank you very much. Hands for our speaker, and the speaker is thanked. Speaking for the resolution, Barry Tamsin. Barry, you can unmute and you have 2 minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I just want to start off by saying that I said the affirmative, but I really am a bit neutral or unsure on where I stand on this topic, particularly because I feel like, one, the word school choice really needs a lot of unpacking, which I feel like we heard from speakers today in regards to, are we talking about vouchers? Are we talking about school choice from public to private, public to charter, private funded, and all of these different variables? And that type of lack of clarity in the jargon, I feel also leads to confusion with those trying to have these conversations. And I think too, in the resolution in regards to improving our entire education system, I don't know if I 100% agree with that, but I will say in the medium and short term, it does enhance equity, particularly for vulnerable student populations. And I think in regards to improving the entire school system, I know that the lady before that was a lawyer and someone else who was speaking had talked about reforming our schools and perhaps looking at different goals. I think something that really resonates with me is, how do we create on a systems level the type of professional development? So for me, it's not just about money, right? Teachers are not just getting the professional development they need to become effective, and they're not given the resources and manpower that they need to effectively run a classroom of students, particularly in these public schools with diverse student populations and students with IEP goals and a plethora of other variables that are thrown at them. So that's kind of where I'm at with this. And I'd like to hear the government also, I think, perhaps have a conversation about really reforming our school system, right? I think that's where it comes down to as well in regards to a lot of this red tape. Because the reality is that there is a lot of bureaucracy involved, and that is why these, charter type of pop-ups, let's say, did come up as an alternative.
Yes, thank you.
And that's where I'm at.
Thank you. The hands for our speaker, and speaker is thanked. Speaking against the resolution, Rachel. Rachel, you can unmute and you have 2 minutes.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, this is a wonderful discussion. I've really enjoyed everything that I've heard here. Again, 35-year retired educator. And it's funny because I'm thinking back, and it seems like what goes around comes around. 30 years ago, we had magnet schools. We had schools where, people could choose where to go. We had law-related education schools. We had bilingual, immersion schools, things like that. And now we're still talking about this 30 years later. Also, the fact that being in Arizona, we are 47th, 48th, 49th in the country for per pupil spending, which, we're at the bottom of the barrel. My concern, I agree with the other speakers, the funding is the big thing. You get what you pay for. And in Arizona now with our voucher system, we will lose $1 billion for our public schools that is being diverted to our voucher system. And already the people that are collecting the vouchers are getting money, and they are the ones who already have students in private schools that are charging $16,000 a year. So they are getting basically a $7,000 check to use that for private schools. So we are creating a society and a system where we have the haves and the have-nots. So the poor students who cannot afford the extra $9,000 for those private schools is hurting. And it, believe me, it's big business. I know not all the parochial schools because they get other funding, but for-profit charter schools, it's a big business, and they can't wait to get their hands on that money. And it is going to divert money from our public schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Hands for our speaker, and the speaker is thanked. We have several more people still lined up to speak. I'm going to get everybody in somehow. Joel Sternstein, I am calling on you. You have 2 minutes. Joel, are you with us? Can you unmute to speak? All right, might have stepped away. We'll come back to him. Beth Bauer. Beth, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, I live in Wisconsin. I live in Milwaukee, where we were considered ground zero for school choice. We have had a lot of research. I've been in the school supply business for over 40 years, and I've seen what it is destroying our schools and our education system. The test result, I have numbers, but I won't give them now. I won't have time. Test results are down. School choice has been supporting people who have been going to private schools. 77% last year of voucher students came from private schools. They can teach whatever they want. It teaches discrimination. We had an 80% increase in anti-Semitic incidents last year in high school and middle schools. There is no oversight, and we are at full school choice, where you can go to not just a charter school, you can go to a private school, any public school, and these private schools are able to teach whatever they want on the public dollars. So if somebody says this is going to have some fairy tale ending, it's like the Pied Piper leading everybody off a cliff, and we're all going to follow him and we're going to drown. And then when it's all done, it's going to be like Humpty Dumpty, and we can't get this put back together again. And it's like in Arizona, it's about funding. They are taking the money from the public schools. And when you lose that money, you still have to support that school, the teachers, and everybody else. You don't just your money just doesn't just go and support something else. So we better be very, very careful, because we may be getting what we're asking for, and we're not going to get the results we expect. And the results are in Wisconsin. Just take a look.
All right, hands for our speaker. The speaker is thanked. I'm just doing speeches on the topic now, and I'm just going in the line of people that are lined up to speak, and I see more people are being added. We're going to do what we can. I'm going to get you out on time. Cynthia G.H. King, would you like to speak? You have 2 minutes.
Okay, well, then I will try to talk really fast. First of all, I got a wonderful public education in a working class suburb of Cleveland of 100,000 people. 100% of them were white. My husband got a wonderful private education at a very exclusive boys' school. And our 5 children got a wonderful education at an inner city. Because sometimes when I describe the schools my kids went to, they go, oh, well, we couldn't afford that kind of a fancy private. This was an inner city urban school in Columbus, Ohio. And they got an excellent education. My husband believed that our kids got as close to the private school education that his parents paid through the nose for as any kid could get. The school was majority Black, and by that I do not mean it was 49% white. It was 49% white and everything else. It was majority Black. We have school choice within our system that includes French immersion, Spanish immersion, STEM schools. Schools, they are sort of lining up for sports because it could be that the kid really wants a career in sports, or it could be just a kid who doesn't sit still well, so they have to do a lot of sports. But they all have to pass the same tests at different levels. It doesn't matter what you're in, you better learn how to read and write, do your math, do whatever you have to do by a certain date, no matter which of, as we've had charter schools in Ohio, they have been a total disaster. We had a lobbyist who committed fraud that was tried in the courts, but running around the state, opening up charter schools. They would pretend to open pretend to have more people. They'd get a bunch of cash up front, and then they would close, and in the middle of the school year, or maybe even only 2 months into the school year, dump all the kids on back into the public school. We had,
Thank you.
okay, we also had one you can look up on the internet called Bishop Sycamore. We had 2 of those. Total fraud. Not a single kid ever got a day of it, literally not one day of education.
Thank you. Hands for our speaker. The speaker is thanked. We're in the home stretch now. Our next speaker, Michael. Michael, you can unmute and you have 2 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I live? Perfect. Truth in Advertising, I'm related to the chair. I'm her husband. So thank you for allowing me to speak. I probably should have spoken when we had 4 minutes, because as a teacher, there's a lot that I've heard that I want to address.
You're not going to disagree with her, right?
Oh, no. But
Sorry, I apologize, Chair.
I will try to keep it to 2 minutes. I kind of feel like as a public school, currently a public school teacher, but I also taught in a parochial school, and the parochial school I taught with, we were paid very poorly because we saw it as a mission to the lower class community around us. We were trying to draw people in. We did such a good job of giving scholarships to the lower class that we put ourselves out of business, which is why I'm in public school now. So I've seen a lot of this, but that small school is really effective. And I think the reason that small private school was effective was because we had buy-in from the parents. And I feel like we're kind of talking around a societal issue. We're talking structures. Are we going to do charter schools? Are we going to do public schools? I think that America as a whole has moved away from seeing education as central to the health of the democracy. I think we've moved away from a position where we believe that education is an intrinsic good. All the time when I'm in school now, I hear people talking about education as a tool for a job. I don't want to deny that. We need engineers, right? We need doctors. We need people with technical skills, but it's more than that. I get asked all the time by students, why do I have to learn all this math you're teaching me? And what I want to say is because it's good for your humanity. Ignorance is not a virtue, okay? Understanding the world around you, being able to see different points of view, that's important. And I feel like that's kind of been lost in American society as a whole. What I see happening is parents have stepped away and said, teachers, you're the professionals, take care of this. And we cannot effectively teach without parents having buy-in. Parents have to support, teachers have to teach, and students have to learn. And until my timer went off. Until as a society, we get back to the place like in Finland, where 25% of the elementary school kids say they want to grow up to be teachers. Obviously, there's something in this society that says education is important. If we can get back to that, the rest of the structural stuff will work itself out.
Hands for our speaker. And with that, the speaker is thanked. I could just listen to you speak all evening, and I'm looking forward to it this evening. All right. Our next speaker, oh my gosh, we're 5 minutes away from ending. Okay, I'm going to take one more for just 2 minutes, and that's Roy Vela. Roy, you have 2 minutes.
Great. Michael was a great lead-in. My children were born and educated in London up until 4th, 6th, and 7th grade when we returned to the States, and now we're outside Boston. I also come from a family of educators: sister, father, sister-in-law, mother-in-law, father-in-law. I got teachers all around me. And what Michael said is the pertinent point to me, is that we've sort of lost the purpose from my perspective. Like, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to make factory workers? Are we trying to make articulate citizens? Are we trying to make college? I mean, one amazing thing about this conversation for me is we didn't talk about the fact that the public school system is a feeder into a highly profitable university system that is out of control as far as I'm concerned. I mean, we have another bureaucratic layer of money flowing around. And so I do feel like this is a systemic problem, and it's a complicated problem. And by the way, I think all the comments tonight were brilliant. Like, it is really, really messy. It's complicated. It happens at federal, state, county, and town level. Like, I mean, it's a mess, but I really wish we had sort of almost a continental Congress of education. Like, what are we trying to achieve with educating our our populace and what's the main goal. And when I compare UK to US, I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed. My kids were way ahead of their peers when we got back, and to stay with their age group had to just kind of retreat. They went backwards, and we're fine with it. By the way, 4th, 6th, and 7th grade having no homework and easier days, they were like, yeah, this is great. Like, but it was sad. It was sad, and we can do better. I know we can.
Thank you. Hands for our speaker, and the speaker is thanked.